You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Forhad. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. As you guys know, we're located in New York City. Just based on the amount of people that are on the trains, the buses, on the streets, the amount of cars and traffic and everything else that's going on, feels like we're moving, traveling, and getting back to some of what we used to do pre-pandemic. So that's a really great thing. And from what we're seeing, people are also getting on planes and traveling for business and pleasure again. So also a really good sign. We thought it'd be a good idea to do an episode about protecting global travelers with my very good friend and incredibly special guest, Sascha Kunkel, Executive Chairman of Algiz Security, based out of France. How are you, Sascha?
Hello, Forhad. It's my honor to be with you today, so I'm doing very well.
Well, thanks for joining us today. And I thought it would make sense just to kind of give folks, how do we know each other, right? I mean, you're in Europe, I'm here in the States. So about 15 years ago, a mutual friend actually introduced me to Sascha. A really important client of ours was traveling to Europe with his family and wanted to set up a sort of transportation and protection detail. And when I reached out to this friend who's got a lot of experience in protecting the travelers of his organization globally in some murky areas, he said, look no further. Here's Sascha's contact information. And that's what I did. I reached out to Sascha, and luckily for us, 15 years later almost, we're still friends and we've done a lot of work together. And needless to say, that particular job that I had reached out to him about was completed flawlessly. So I'm leaving out a lot of details about the last 15 years, but does that all sound familiar, Sascha?
Oh, Forhad, yes. And I know the 15 years they have flown by so quickly. I wouldn't even know where to start myself.
Yeah. Well, we'll get back to the significance of the 15 years also, because I'd like to take some of the credit for you guys getting to 15 years, but we'll get back to that later in the show. So one thing I can tell you about this business, the investigative and security business, and Sascha, I think you'd agree, people generally fall into two categories, right? Either they get it or they don't get it. And there's very little bit in between. And I can tell you one thing, Sascha and his team get it. So I want to pick his brain a little bit about what he and his team do and how they do it. So if that's okay with you, Sascha, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Sure, my pleasure.
So can you talk a little bit about your experience in protecting global travelers?
Well, I think I give you a little bit of my background.
Yeah.
I'm born in Germany, so I grew up in Bavaria, near a big German base, which a lot of American troops came by now and then for big maneuvers back in the 70s and 80s. And so I decided since my youngest age to become a soldier, and that's what I did when I left with 18 to France to join the French Foreign Legion. And the French Foreign Legion gave me a lot of cultural understanding, and I'm telling you this because I think it's one of the key things when you travel is cultural understanding. And so the Foreign Legion gave me that because there's over 140 40 different nationalities serving in the same army. And we did 2 operational tours in the 5 years I've done, and I think that gave me a good basis to later on continue within the security business.
So it's interesting to, what you mentioned about cultural sort of awareness, and that being one of the first things that you mentioned. Just going back to what I said earlier about getting it and not getting it. I mean, that's just such a critical point.
So yeah, so after I left the French Foreign Legion, I decided to go into the security business. Obviously, being a soldier doesn't mean you're a good security operator, and so I obviously needed some field work and a lot of training, which I undertook in very diverse countries like Israel and France and Germany and in the UK, and then I worked for 4 or 5 years with a very diverse clients around the globe. And then there was the 9/11 event where obviously international travel was completely reviewed in its security posture, and obviously America had put up a lot of rules and regulations for anyone that wanted to travel to the US. And so I got a job actually at the airport in Paris, and that was to set up all those security procedures for the travelers and the airplanes and the security of the aircraft and the control of the passengers and luggage, which didn't exist really before. So that again helped me to gain a lot of insight on this whole traveling business.
Sure. And so so from there, this is going back, you're saying, till around like 2001, 2002. How long did you do that, and where'd you transition to from there?
Well, I transitioned from once the whole airport thing was set up, I did a tour to Japan for the Football World Cup, and we were working there with the Japanese police to receive travelers from all over the world, which they had absolutely no idea on how to deal with, because obviously the Japanese culture is pretty closed in, or was pretty closed in back then. And I think it was the very first time ever that they hosted an international event, and then one like soccer or football is quite a burden to carry, because the travelers can be very special, as we all know.
Yeah.
And so our job was basically to identify the hooligans with the German, British, and French police, and to stop them from entering Japan and bringing them back to their home countries. So we were traveling forward and backwards to Japan, and this whole thing obviously lasted nearly 6 months, which was quite interesting. And once I got back from there, I continued to work in private security for private families, and then the Iraq war started, and it was now about 3 or 4 years I left the military, and this whole I had a feeling I still had to go back to a war zone to do some more work, and so I did. And so I accompanied the Department of State and the Department of Defense, the US Department of Defense, in their work in reconstructing Iraq. And my job was taking care of a big American NGO, and I was helping them to set up in Iraq and to spread the democracy, basically.
Wow. Well, that and you were so tell me about, like, at that time you didn't start your first business yet, right? You were still working for someone else, or working directly for the government?
That's correct. I was still working for private companies.
Yeah.
That obviously had contracts with those NGOs, and especially with this NGO. And we were the first team, I believe, or one of the first teams ever in Iraq back then, working with local nationals. And so I set up a complete concept for this contract on how to live and work along the Iraqi population, to train up local security teams, to invest in the local market around the project, by buying food, by using the local electrician and any other logistical needs. So everything done was locally, with local supplies. Sometimes was a bit tricky because there wasn't that much on the market. So we still use the locals, but we send them up to Kurdistan or to Kuwait or wherever was the closest border to get some more supplies. And that allowed us obviously to integrate into the local environment absolutely and completely. And we opened projects like that in Baghdad, and then in Basra, and then in Tikrit. And it was a very enriching experience, because we met a lot of friends. Yes, obviously sometimes it was dangerous because there was a few people not very happy that we were spreading the word of democracy.
Sure.
But all in all, I can just say I met a lot of good friends, and I'm still in contact with them. And whenever I need something in Iraq or in the region, I know I can count on them.
That's amazing. I actually didn't know that part of your life. That's really pretty interesting. So I guess that takes us, that's probably around the 2007.
Well, I spent nearly 4 years there, and when I come back, well, the contract was finished at that point. Yep. And moved into a new era, and so I had a decision to make for myself. Yep. And question was, do I continue working for others, or do I open up my own shop? And yep. I didn't accept how the security market was turning back in that day. And yep. A lot of companies obviously made a lot of profit on a lot of different projects, and what they forgot was to continue to try and reach excellence. And what that did is it became a mass market, and suddenly in 2007 you've seen people in a war zone, which was still a very dangerous conflict zone back then. Yep. You saw people there which had absolutely nothing to do there. And sure. That obviously created incidents that could have been completely avoided. And so we all know one or the other story of the things that happened between 2007 and 2008 in Iraq with certain private security companies. And obviously I wanted to distance myself from such ways of serving clients. And so the only solution for me was to open up my own company and to do it differently.
Right. Yeah, no, and again, that's around the same time that again we had met, right? That's around the same time that we had met. And I just remember, it's interesting because we didn't have that conversation, right? I really didn't know that whole part of your life. And the thought process of opening up a business like you're describing, and doing it different, doing it, better, and doing it properly. And I'll tell you, without knowing that, I can confidently say that that's the way it felt. That's why I like dealing with you, right? Is that you cut through all the BS, understand, what the needs are, provide a reasonable solution, right? Not too much, not too little, but something within reason. And I always, so it's kind of interesting to put, and this happens sometimes on the show because like I don't talk to people all the time about every detail of their life, but because we're doing a show, we get into more details, and I find stuff out like this about people. So it's actually one of the side benefits for me in learning more about people I know already, right? So that's really interesting. So you start your own business, right?
Yeah.
And now you start developing your own clients. So who are you doing business with? Like, obviously, I'm sure 15 years ago and today it's a little bit different, but maybe you could talk a little bit in general, obviously without telling us who they are, who you're working with, and what you're doing for them?
Well, I think the biggest journey or the biggest learning curve in the last 15 years is, and I actually found that out myself over the last 2 or 3 years only, was that once you create a business, you obviously want to be able to do everything, and you need to find your path, and you need to find your way, and you need to figure out as well in what you're good in. Yep. And what you're not so good in, and you need to accept certain facts, right? And sure. What happened somehow naturally was that we were always confronted with very complicated tasks, and they were either dangerous, or nobody else wanted to do them, or nobody knew how to deal with it, or nobody wanted to take the risk, or whatever it was. It was always complicated, and we just felt it. We just felt it naturally, and we took any problem on, and then we, like you said, we cut through and tried to figure out on how to deal with it the best way, right. in a financial way that is also doable for the client, because I mean you can do anything with money, right? But it doesn't mean the product at the end is what you actually need.
Sure.
So in the beginning we had different clients which brought us all over Africa, and we assisted different airlines and cargo airlines and passenger airlines in their logistic needs and the security needs in different countries in Africa, which didn't necessarily have a logistic hub back in the day. It only started because, it only grew really into something more developed in the last 15 years, because companies like Emirates, for example, opened up a lot of local airports with ground staff, which they left there, and no other airline ever did that. And so what they needed was, they needed a fixer, a local fixer, and they needed a driver, and they needed someone to take care of the administrative act when you arrive in the country, and so on. And then in certain countries where, let's say, the local law is a little bit lax, depending on who is at the border post, you can be confronted, if you don't have local knowledge, with a lot of problems, and suddenly you find yourself in trouble with the police, because you obviously didn't do anything wrong, but they will find something that you did wrong, and so they will ask you for a fine, and if you can't pay them, well, then you're not leaving. And if someone, like an airplane, is stuck on the ground, it costs you thousands of dollars every minute, because that airplane isn't flying. And so this needed to be avoided by all means. And so this is how we started off in the beginning, with these ad hoc missions all over Africa. And so we had different NGOs and different airlines, and some private clients and investors who had investment projects in some very remote areas where you also needed some people to be able to go there without creating a problem for everyone involved in the operation, obviously.
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you, man, the world is a relative place, and I as I listen to some of the challenges you guys work your way through, it certainly makes some of the stuff that we've been involved in, while it seemed challenging, really not that challenging. So obviously you've already gone through that. So where's your team gone? I mean, what are some of the places in the world, some of the more complicated places in the world that you guys have been?
Well,
I think you've already answered that in a way, but just to expand on that a little bit.
I mean, I think we did a count the other day, because we have our 15th anniversary coming up, and so I needed to have some info on what did we actually do in the last 15 years. I mean, when you start counting the things that you have done, you're suddenly like, okay,
Wow.
not too
Yeah.
bad. And we counted between 70 and 80 countries that we worked in.
Yeah.
Obviously, many countries in Africa, on the African continent, several in Asia. We've been to America, we've been to South America. We worked in Australia. I think we just didn't do any work on the North Pole yet, but you never know, you know.
Yeah.
When you look at the geopolitical situation at the moment, maybe the North Pole is coming up as some working zones sometime soon.
You never know. And you guys did a lot of work. I mean, and maybe are still doing some work in the Ukraine and I guess possibly Russia. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, we do, and we did a lot of work in the Ukraine. But it's something we do since 2014, actually, because the war started 2014 for us, and we were very much involved with local security companies that wanted to develop a different way of operating there and a more European way, because they found out that many investors had a big mistrust in what was going on in the Ukraine. Like even today, certain parties or defenders of Russia and so on claim Ukraine not being European or being a complete corrupt country and so on. Well, I think any country that's in its own making and not a very old country after all has obviously all those challenges to deal with. And when you have countries that have 100, 200, 300 years, or like Europe, over 1,000 years of history, then obviously all these problems have been solved some time ago, and rules have been established in one way or another. And so we tried obviously to help Ukraine doing that by advising them on how they could better structure their private security approach. And we also always tried to do something for the veterans coming back from the Donbas region, and try to give them some ideas on how they could train them up and use this experience that they gained at the front line as a strength for the private security industry, because these guys were confronted with some horrible stuff, obviously. And so this is an experience you don't want to lose, and especially in private security, I think it can be a strength.
Yeah, no, I mean that's. I'll tell you, man. I had saved this question, thinking that everything that we discussed up to this point would lead up to this, but you've already told some. But one of the things that the show is called Investigation Insiders, right? So what we like to do is peel back the layers of the things that we're discussing and give a behind the scenes look at different things, right? So what we've learned is our listeners love anecdotes, war stories, right? Can you, maybe talk to us about a protection detail or something along those lines that had some interesting twists and turns? Again, you've already told us a lot, but is there anything specific that sticks out in your mind?
I actually have an anecdote which maybe some people will think it's a joke, but it was really not a joke. It is very much reality.
I love when stories start that way, by the way.
I think there's one thing that is very important in our industry, is that you work hard and that you party hard, that you have a very good capacity for very dark humor as well, because otherwise it will be very complicated coping with some of these situations.
For sure.
So to that story, I mean, it was back in 2006, I think, when we were in Iraq, and we had a project in mind and open up a base in Tikrit. And just to remind everyone, I mean, this was when Saddam Hussein was already caught and he was in jail and he was about to be trialed. And so we were working with this NGO, and my best and favorite client on this earth, Julie, asked me if we could fly to Tikrit to meet with the military commander over there to discuss our setup in the Tikrit area. And so I said, absolutely, no problem. And so we took an Hercules military flight in the morning. And as we departed Baghdad airport, we got shot at, I think, by a rocket-propelled grenade or something like that. And obviously the airplane went into an evasive maneuver, and that makes any roller coaster that we all know look like a baby carousel. And so he's shooting its flares and going into this evasive maneuver and trying to win altitude. And obviously it's a very crisp moment for anyone. And I was looking at Julie, Julie was looking at me, and we were sitting on opposite sides. And I lifted my hand, and with my face I tried to tell her, well, nothing we can do, enjoy the ride, you know. And so she just suddenly screamed on the top of her voice, "Tell those idiots to stop." So we both bursted out laughing, and we continued the flight.
Oh man.
And so when we arrived in Tikrit, we obviously met with this commander and tried to explain him that we are opening up shop, and that we have identified in a couple of recon missions previously some houses and so on that we would live in and so on. And the commander actually asked me, and he's like, okay, so what's the protective detail going to be? How many people will you bring? I said, well, it's 5 and it's me, so it's 6. And he's like, what do you mean 6? 60? 600? 6,000? I said, no, it's 6. We're 6. And he's like, I cannot allow this. This is absolutely crazy. I mean, I have 10,000 men under my command here, and you come here with 6 people protecting Americans. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. And he's like, well, this conversation is over, and I'm not allowing it. And so my client said, well, unfortunately, we're not here to request any authorizations. We're here to inform you that it's going to happen. Right. And so the only thing that we really wanted was go to the PX from time to time and get some petrol, if that's possible. And this is when when the conversation was really over. And yeah, and so we left, and we spoke to each other, and we thought it actually went pretty well. And left back to Baghdad, and then we set up base, and we stayed there for 1.5 years, and we had a great time, you know. So
that's that. Well, just one follow. There's a lot to unpack there, but did you take the same route home that you took there when you were shot at?
We actually went back by helicopter, if I remember, instead of an airplane.
Okay. All right. The you know, again, going back to your comments about, you know, just telling that story about getting, you know, a rocket shot at you guys and go. I mean, that's just that's a story for a lifetime, man. And you're really making me feel insecure about the things I've done in my life, because you've certainly had an exciting one, that's for sure. So I guess fast forward now, right? And let's talk about someone reaches out to you, or someone on your team, and says, all right, I need to travel to South Africa, Iraq, China, wherever, right? What do you guys do? Walk us through the process and help us understand, like, you know, what you go through to understand, deploy, protect, all those kind of things. You know, the people that are requesting the services.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think what clients need to understand is that every mission is different, and every project is different, and every client is different, and every location is different. So there is no such a thing in our business as a price catalog, right? And when people tell me, so how much is your hour? I said, I have absolutely no idea, because I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know with whom. I don't know where. I don't know nothing about it, about the project. So once I know where we're going, then we can do an investigation on saying what is the local situation there, and then what is our capacity there. I mean, we have a very good advantage through this whole Foreign Legion connection, which gives us, as I said earlier, at least 140 different nationalities from where my comrades are from. And if you have this wide possibility of giving someone a call and getting some local knowledge from his brother, his sister, his mother, his uncle, whoever, because somebody knows always someone in some place, that's for sure. And I have a saying actually, which is you always have a legionnaire in every village, and a priest or a rabbi, and sometimes it's the same guy as the legionnaire, right? Because they all convert in different jobs after the Foreign Legion. So the reality is you have to find this guy and find out what's going on locally. And once we know that, we need to speak obviously with the client and find out what do they really want to do. Is this a day trip? Is it a long-term project? Is it something that will be created in stages? How many people will be involved? Will they employ locals? What's their business? Because it will depend on, will you import, will you export, will you create something, will you need supplies, etc., etc. And all these things will play into the security concept that we will create for the client.
Yep. It's interesting what you talk about, and we talk a lot about this, and I think it's true for all the different types of work that we all do, which is when a client has a need, whether it's investigative, whether it's protection, whether it's due diligence, whatever it is, be prepared to provide as much information as possible, right, to whomever you're calling, because if someone provides you with an answer without requesting a lot of information, and says it in an absolute way, that's a red flag to me. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100%, absolutely. No, it's absolutely key. If you don't know what you're dealing with, you cannot deal with it. It's impossible.
Yeah, the rates question is always a challenge, because again, you know how it goes. I mean, you want the clients, right? We want the clients. That's what makes our business go round and round, right? But sometimes, the questioning is just an interesting one, saying, I need some investigative services. What do you charge? How exactly? How are we supposed to answer that question? Let us know more. Well, I just need a simple thing. Can you just give me what's the cost of that? No, I can't. Just I'm listening to what you said earlier, almost like in a laughing way. It's just so hard to answer that question. So just interesting stuff. But one of the things, like all of the things that you talked about, goes into preparation, right? Like once you deploy, once you're actually in the mission, at that point, you want to know all the different factors. You want to be prepared. You want to all that. It should be easy at that point. The harder part is almost preparing, right? So can you talk about the importance of training for your team? And when I say team, I mean everyone, right? Your agents, your supervisors, your managers, your executives. Can you talk a little bit about, training?
Training, a lot of in the security industry and even in the laws that they have brought out in Europe and in every different European country at the moment on this minimum standard for the private security industry. And not one country does the same thing as the other. They all have similarities, but it's nothing is is done in the same way, which makes the whole process a little bit complicated.
Yep.
But the thing is that everybody thinks that once they have done that basic training, well, that's it. Now I'm a professional.
Right.
And it's like in the military. I mean, once you have done basic training, you know how to walk basically, and you know how to sing a couple of songs, and maybe you know how to shoot approximately straight. And so the same thing in the private security, right? So if you have done your basic training, you have an idea on where you're going to work in, what's your rights and what's your duties, and then training only starts, because then people need to understand, I think today, is that everything moves so fast that that when somebody says we've always done it that way, he's definitely on the wrong way. Anything needs to be taken that can be taken today. And I give you an example. There is no, at least I don't know of any, but you have clients and the daughter is horse riding. So now what you're going to do? Follow her with a quad because you have a security detail that doesn't know how to ride a horse. So of course they need to learn how to ride a horse. And then people look at you, it's like, what do you mean they learn how to ride a horse? I said, yes, you know, they go in a horse training school and they do a couple of weeks there, and after 2 weeks they can ride a horse. It's not that complicated after all. I mean, these people are in general fit, and sports is nothing new for them, so they can learn how to ride a horse. Or we had a lot of intoxication situations in Europe with Russian clients, obviously getting intoxicated with all very different substances, you know. And then there's a lot of rumors out there, and and people will question you. Yeah, but I need this and I need that, and I need NBC specialists, and I need a doctor, and I need a food taster, and I need all these things. Yeah? And then you have to explain to these people that all this is nonsense. And then people need to understand how you come to that nonsense. And then you need to develop a course, actually, and that's what we did once with nuclear, biological, and chemical laboratory in France. There's one of the biggest in the south of France. And so I asked the head professor there, and I said, is it possible to create a course for us, please, to train our guys on everything that they need to know on intoxication? And I mean, 3-day course, nothing big, but it came out with one sentence at the end, which was everything is poison and everything is toxic. It depends on the amount of it that you have in your body, obviously. And so whatever you have in excess in your body will kill you at some point. And so once you understand that, you know, then you understand that it's very complicated to detect these things, because if anything can be poison, if you don't know what you're looking for, you will not find it. Now you can do a few guesses on the reactions, but once you're intoxicated, 9 times out of 10 people react pretty much the same way. And so if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't search it. If you can't find it, you can't treat it. And so it's basically, yeah, an endless road. So back to the training question. I think there's so much things to learn in these days that language is key, in my opinion. When anyone is traveling these days, you need to be able to count to 10, order your food, say yes and say hello, and all these basic things, because it will be a door opener when you obviously deal with locals in any country, that if you can already greet them in their language and ask for the most necessary products, or for food, or for water, or for whatever it is, or just say thank you, it will bring you a step closer to them. And once you are familiar with a nation or a location, you can actually do your job in security.
Yep. No, that's interesting. And again, we've already alluded to this. Just protection and preparation is key, because again, a lot of times the protection component of it just becomes logistics. It becomes customer service, it becomes relationships, and all of these things that you talk about prepare you for that. So that's really interesting. So going back to what we talked about earlier, 15 years, which matches how long we've known each other. How does it feel? I mean, how do you feel 15 years later, doing this and doing as much as you guys have done? And, you know, like, does it feel real? Does it feel surreal? I mean, what do you feel like?
Well, I actually asked myself this question preparing this speech for the anniversary, and I sat in front of my computer and I was like, okay, how are you gonna start that speech?
Yeah.
And so I was sitting there and I was hit by a million different flashbacks, basically. And the only thing that came into my mind was, maybe I should see that psychologist after all, you know?
Oh, man.
So like, PTSD, is this a burnout syndrome or is it just passion?
Right. Well, do you have your answer yet?
I think it's passion. At least I hope it is.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. I mean, you know, definitely congratulations on it. Obviously, I had a front row seat and kind of seeing what you guys have done, and it's pretty incredible. So, congratulations on the success. And you keep expanding, man. I mean, your passion keeps taking you to new places. So, we've obviously talked about this offline, but can you talk a little bit about your new initiative, the campus?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a mixture of all these things that you live through in life, and when you meet different people from different countries with different businesses and different ideas, and I thank you for this as well, because I think I learned a lot of things working with you and your team, Forhad, in the last 15 years, and I think it would be so much easier for all of us who are now in this business for so many years that we would do a bit of sharing with those that will either replace us one day, or that help us every day, or they want to be our competition. You know, nothing is better than a healthy competition. And so I thought, well, I don't want to open up a training school myself, reinventing hot water. There's absolutely no point for that. But what we had more in mind was like a university, and I say that like a university, and I've never been to university myself really, but I did some online studying, but I was not in university. Like a university campus where people can meet from all different nations, with different professionals, again, from all over the world, which will share through seminars, training courses, or just workshops, the knowledge of security that we all have. And I think there's a big need for that, because the reality is the world has become such a small place, that in our business everybody knows each other at some point. I mean, it's very complicated not to meet someone that is in international security. You know, I think everybody knows of everybody at some point, and everybody works with everybody. Not everybody likes each other. I'm not saying that, but
sure.
But when you work with people, you don't need to get married, right? You can just work with people. So
yep.
And I think that is also part of that idea with the campus, is to actually bring it to a professional level where we all share some things with each other, because that will actually allow us to communicate better. I see this often in my company, and we have some 30 different nationalities in my company, and obviously there's so many different views and ideas on the same topic. And if you listen to these people, from my employees, from time to time, you're like, oh guys, you're arguing with each other, but you're saying exactly the same thing. And it's only because it's a cultural difference, and it's a way of how people express themselves in their natural language, and if they then translate it into English and they all speak English with each other, obviously everybody comes across a little bit different. And I always like to give that example where when I'm native German and I speak French fluent, and I have Germans working with me and I have French people working with me, and when the German translates German into English, it sounds always a little bit too polite, because it's the way translated, but it sounds too polite. It sounds ass licking. I'm sorry for my English. And when the French speaks English, it sounds rude, you know. And everybody says, yeah, the French, they're so rude. And in the end of the day, if you translate what both of these people say to each other, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's also part of this idea with the campus, is to bring different nations together and to share this wisdom with each other. That's the idea.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I think you are the guy to do it and bring sort of all these different groups together. And so I'm certainly excited about it, and we're certainly going to track it and share with folks that are in the industry, and hopefully the more people that participate, the more information that's shared, the better for everyone. I mean, so it's pretty exciting. So I guess usually we end the show with takeaways, right, from the episode. And I always say this, and people get on me for saying it, but I really feel like the entire. First of all, again, I learned a lot about you, and I thank you for your time. But I'd open it up to you to, if there's anything you want to leave our audience with before we break off here, please do that.
Well, again, thank you for having me, and I'm really honored, to be honest, to be able to share some of my experience with you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, so my recommendation, I think people should start in opening their mind by reading different news, because today there's a lot of going on about fake news, real news, wrong news, right news, whatever. I mean, in the end of the day, you cannot ignore it, because everybody is pushing out their propaganda in one way or another. And we as professionals, we need to be able to make a judgment, not based on politics, not based on economics, not based on religion. It needs to be neutral, because otherwise you cannot make a decision in security that is correct, and it won't be working because you're biased in one way or another. And so what I recommend to not fall into this trap and to say, yeah, this news channel is the best news channel and that is the worst. Well, I recommend to actually look for different news channels that are obviously mainstream or even not mainstream, but that are different nationalities, different religions, different cultural backgrounds. They can all speak English today. Everybody has an English channel. If you are in Iceland or in France or in Abu Dhabi, everybody has an English news channel. And so if you listen to these news channels instead of one only, you will get a story about the same story, which is always told in a different way. Mm-hmm. And because you listen to that exact same story in a different way, one time, two times, three times, four times over a week, well, after a week, you will be able to actually make your own opinion about it. Because every one of these news channels will not lie to you fully and bluntly. None of them will brainwash you through one show, absolutely not the case. But everybody wants to feed you, obviously, with what their local government or whatever allows them to publish or what wants them to publish. And so when you go around that and you actually do this mix and then you cut that information that you received into something more neutral. Well, maybe it's not always the exact answer to everything, but it certainly brings you a little bit closer to it.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And, it was just great to have you on the show, and I thank you. And we'll put Sascha's information as well as his company, and then any information on the campus as well in the description of the podcast. Please feel free to reach out to him directly or through us. Either way is good. And thank you for continuing to tune in and following us and commenting and all the support. Till next time, thank you very much.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.